Marrowood Court. The name itself felt like a secret, a chilling story shared in hushed tones. People rarely spoke it aloud. When they did, their voices dropped. Their eyes darted around as if merely uttering the name could summon something. Something unwelcome, something old. The neighborhood sat at the edge of town, almost forgotten, or perhaps deliberately ignored. A place you didn't stumble upon by accident. You had to be looking for it, or perhaps it had to be looking for you. Its reputation was a dark, heavy cloak. The houses themselves looked ordinary enough, at first glance anyway. Weathered paint, manicured lawns, some a little too perfect, others strangely overgrown, deceptively normal. But the longer you looked, the more you saw. The way the shadows clung to the eaves, even on the brightest days. The stillness of the air. A heavy, expectant quiet. Like the world holding its breath, waiting. Children from other streets never played here. Their parents warned them away, with grim faces and tight lips. They said Marrowood was different. They said it was wrong. Stories clung to Marrowood Court like cobwebs. Tales of sudden departures. Of families fleeing in the dead of night, leaving everything behind. Whispers of strange lights seen in empty windows. Of sounds that had no earthly source. No one could ever prove anything, of course. These were just stories. Local legends, the kind that grew wilder with each retelling. Yet no one ever bought a house in Marrowood Court without a shiver. A deep, undeniable sense of unease. A feeling that they were stepping into something much larger and much older than themselves. The welcome it offered was not warm. It was a cold invitation, a silent dare, to enter its quiet streets, to walk beneath its watchful trees, to breathe its peculiar air. Marrowood Court didn't need signs to announce its nature. You felt it in your bones, a prickling on your skin, the kind of feeling that tells you you're not alone, even when you can't see anyone. It was a place that whispered its secrets, but only to those who were willing to listen, or perhaps those it chose to speak to. The welcome was there, but it promised nothing good. The air in Marrowood Court was thick. You could almost taste it. A faint metallic tang mixed with the scent of damp earth and something else, something sweet, almost cloying, like forgotten flowers left to decay. It settled in your lungs, heavy, uncomfortable. The silence was another thing entirely. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was a presence, a living, breathing entity. It pressed in from all sides, amplifying every tiny creak, every rustle of leaves, every beat of your own anxious heart. It made you listen for things you didn't want to hear. Shadows in Marrowood Court had a life of their own. They stretched too long. They clung too dark, even in the middle of the day. Sunlight seemed hesitant here, as if it knew it wasn't entirely welcome. It filtered weakly through the dense canopy of ancient trees, trees whose branches twisted like arthritic fingers, reaching, grasping. The shadows danced in the corners of your eyes, playing tricks, making you doubt what you saw or what you thought you saw. They were deeper here, more profound, as if the darkness itself had roots in this place. There was a constant feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of your neck, the kind that makes you turn around quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was never anyone there. Just the empty street, the silent houses, their dark windows like vacant eyes, staring, observing, judging. It wasn't a specific threat, not yet, just a pervasive awareness that you were under scrutiny by something unseen, something patient. This feeling never left. It was part of the fabric of Marrowood Court, woven into its very existence. The neighborhood felt sentient, as if the houses, the trees, the very ground beneath your feet were all part of a single slumbering consciousness, one that was slowly waking. Or perhaps it had never truly slept. It pulsed with a subtle energy, a low thrum, barely perceptible, but always there, underneath the silence, underneath the stillness. It was an ancient, brooding presence, one that had soaked into the soil over countless years, creating an atmosphere not just of neglect, but of active, waiting malevolence. A place that remembered everything and forgave nothing. Paranormal activity was not a rare occurrence in Marrowood Court. It was the norm, the baseline, the unsettling rhythm of daily life, or unlife. Doors would creak open slowly, then slam shut with sudden violence. When no breeze stirred the air, footsteps would echo in empty hallways. heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth, as if searching for something or someone. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of the neighborhood's character, as common as the chirping of crickets elsewhere, but far more chilling. Objects had a habit of moving, seemingly on their own accord. A teacup rattling in its saucer, a book sliding off a shelf, a child's toy rolling across the floor, always when you weren't looking directly, catching the movement only from the corner of your eye, making you question your sanity. These small disturbances were constant, little reminders that you shared your space with things unseen, things that like to play games or perhaps issue warnings. The residents learned to live with it, or they learned to leave quickly. Whispers were common, faint, sibilant. Just beyond the edge of hearing, you could never quite make out the words, but the intent was clear. Sometimes they sounded like sighs, full of sorrow, other times like hushed warnings, urgent, frightened. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very air around you, as if the houses were trying to communicate, to share their long-held secrets, or perhaps to lure you deeper into their mysteries. The whispers were a constant companion, a chilling soundtrack to life in the court. Cold spots were another frequent phenomenon, drifting through rooms like invisible currents. One moment, the air would be normal. The next, a patch of intense bone-chilling cold would envelop you, raising goosebumps, making your breath mist. Even on the warmest days, these pockets of unnatural chill would linger, then vanish as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind a sense of profound unease, a feeling that something had just passed through, something that wasn't alive. Not in any way you understood. These were the calling cards of Marrowood's other residents. Why Marrowood Court? That was the question no one could answer. What made this small cluster of streets a magnet for the strange, for the unsettling? There were theories, of course, passed down through generations. Some spoke of ancient burial grounds, disturbed by the foundations of the first homes. Others whispered of dark rituals conducted in secret long ago, leaving a permanent stain on the land. But these were just stories, fragments of folklores with no solid proof to support them. The truth remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of speculation and fear. The history of the court was shrouded in fog. Official records were sparse, incomplete, as if someone or something had actively tried to erase its past. Old newspaper clippings hinted at tragedies, unexplained disappearances, sudden outbreaks of madness, but the details were always vague, obscured by time and a reluctance to delve too deep. The houses themselves held their secrets close. Their weathered facades were impassive masks, hiding decades, perhaps centuries of sorrow, of fear, of events best left undisturbed. The mystery was part of its power. Attempts to investigate, to find rational explanations, had always failed, or worse. They seemed to provoke the unseen forces, to intensify the activity. As if Marrowood Court resented scrutiny, as if it guarded its secrets jealously. Skeptics who came to debunk the legends often left as believers, shaken, changed, or they simply left, abruptly, refusing to speak of their experiences. The aura of mystery was a protective barrier, discouraging too much curiosity, warning away those who might uncover the true nature of the haunting, and so the neighborhood remained an enigma, a place defined by its unanswered questions, by the palpable sense of an unseen world intertwined with our own. The mystery was a living thing. It breathed in the silences, it lurked in the shadows, it whispered on the wind. It wasn't just the paranormal events themselves that terrified. It was the not knowing, the why, the what, the who. This deep, unsettling ambiguity was the true heart of Marrowood Court's dread, a dread that settled deep in your soul and promised to remain, lingering like a ghost. Tom Henderson wasn't a man who believed in ghosts, not really. He believed in cheap houses, he believed in fresh starts. Marrowood Court offered both, or so he thought. The online listing for the house on Elder Lane had been vague. Needs TLC, it said, motivated seller. The price reflected that motivation deeply. He'd signed the papers quickly, eager to leave the city behind, its noise, its memories. He hadn't asked too many questions about the neighborhood. A mistake, perhaps? The moving truck rumbled down the narrow street. Its engine sounded too loud here, obscene almost, against the backdrop of oppressive quiet. Tom peered through the dusty windshield. The houses slid by, silent sentinels, their windows like dark, vacant eyes. He saw no children playing, no friendly faces peering out. Just a stillness that felt unnatural. A prickle of unease traced its way up his spine. He dismissed it. Nerves, nothing more. This was his new beginning. He wouldn't let a little quiet spook him. He needed this to work. He'd driven out once before, just a quick look at the exterior. The realtor hadn't wanted to linger. He remembered that now. She'd stayed in her car, said she had another appointment. He hadn't thought much of it then. Now the memory felt heavier, more significant. Marrowood Court didn't look charming in the flesh. It looked expectant, as if it had been waiting for him, specifically for him. The trees lining the street were ancient, their branches gnarled, reaching like skeletal fingers. They cast long, distorted shadows, even in the midday sun. The truck shuddered to a halt before number 13, his new home. It looked even more forlorn up close, paint peeled from the clapboard siding like sunburnt skin. One shutter hung crooked, a loose tooth in a weary smile. The lawn was a tangle of weeds, yet Tom felt a strange pull, a sense of inevitability. He was here now. There was no turning back. He took a deep breath. The air was cool, damp. It carried a faint, earthy scent and something else, something he couldn't quite place, something faintly unsettling. He pushed the feeling down. Time to get to work. The key grated in the old lock, a rusty, protesting shriek. The front door creaked open, slowly, painfully, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. A wave of musty air washed over Tom, thick with the smell of dust, decay, and something else, faintly sweet, almost floral, but wrong, like flowers pressed in a book for too long. Forgotten. He stepped inside. The hallway was dark, even with the door ajar. Light struggled to penetrate the gloom. It seemed to stop at the threshold, hesitant, unwilling to enter. He found the light switch, flipped it. Nothing, of course. The power wasn't on yet. He'd have to call the company. Again, little annoyances, that's all they were. He moved further into the house. His footsteps echoed unnervingly on the bare wooden floors. Each step seemed too loud, too intrusive. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing. He could hear his own breathing, the frantic thump of his heart. This house felt empty, but not just empty of furniture, empty of warmth, of life. He started with the boxes labelled kitchen. Small victories, that's what he needed. The kitchen was at the back of the house. It had a large window overlooking a tangled, overgrown garden. The view did little to lift his spirits. The glass was grimy, distorting the already bleak landscape. He set a box on the counter. The thud echoed. He began to unpack. Plates, glasses, cutlery, simple, ordinary things, yet here in this house they felt alien, out of place, as if they didn't belong, as if the house itself resented their presence, their mundane utility. As the afternoon wore on, shadows began to deepen. They crept out from corners, stretched across the floors like dark, grasping tendrils. The house grew colder, noticeably colder. Tom shivered. He told himself it was just an old house, poor insulation, drafts, logical explanations, but the cold felt different. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a damp, penetrating chill. That settled deep in his bones. He found himself glancing over his shoulder more and more frequently. The feeling of being watched was undeniable and deeply unnerving. He was alone, wasn't he? The house to his left was a study in meticulous order, too meticulous. The lawn was an unnaturally vibrant green, edged with military precision, not a blade of grass out of place. The roses in the flower beds were a blood red, perfect, unblemished, almost artificial. Tom hadn't seen anyone there, not yet, but he felt eyes on him every time he went outside to fetch another box from the truck. He'd catch a flicker of movement, a curtain twitching in an upstairs window, just a glimpse. Then stillness. It was unnerving, this silent, unseen scrutiny. The house on the right was the opposite, a picture of decay. Paint hung in long peeling strips. The porch sagged. Windows were dark, blank like the eyes of a skull. He wondered if anyone lived there at all. It looked abandoned. Yet sometimes he thought he saw a light, a dim, flickering glow, deep within the house. Late at night, when he couldn't sleep, which was often these past few days, he'd stare out his own bedroom window into the inky blackness of the neighbouring property and wonder who or what was over there. One afternoon, while wrestling a heavy bookshelf up the porch steps, he saw her, an old woman, standing on the porch of the meticulously kept house. She was rail-thin, dressed in a severe dark dress. Despite the mild weather, Her grey hair was pulled back so tightly it made her face look stretched, mask-like. She didn't smile, she didn't wave, she just stood there, motionless. Her eyes, dark and deeply set, followed his every move. He managed a weak, "Hello?" Her only response was a slow, deliberate blink. Then she turned and glided back inside, and the door clicking shut softly, finally. Later he saw a man in the yard of the dilapidated house. He was large, burly, chopping wood with a frenetic energy, even though it wasn't particularly cold. The rhythmic thud of the axe echoed through the quiet street. The man never looked up, never acknowledged Tom's presence. He just kept swinging. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated, as if he were fighting the wood, or something else entirely. Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. These were his neighbors, the welcoming committee of Marrowood Court. He felt less welcomed than ever. It was a few days later. A knock on the door. So unexpected, Tom nearly jumped out of his skin. He opened it to find a woman. She was younger than the silent watcher, perhaps in her late 40s. She held a small, foil-covered casserole dish. Her smile was wide, a little too wide. Her eyes, however, darted around, never quite settling on him. "Welcome to Elder Lane," she chirped. Her voice was high-pitched, brittle. "I'm Carol, from across the street, number 12. She gestured vaguely with her chin. "Tom Henderson," he replied, trying to sound friendly. "Normal." He took the dish. "Thank you. That's very kind." The casserole felt unnaturally cold, even through the foil. "It's my mother's recipe," Carol said. Her smile faltered for a moment. A shadow passed over her eyes. She loved this neighborhood, loved past tense. Tom noticed. "Well, I appreciate it," he said. An awkward silence descended. Carol's eyes flickered towards the interior of his house, then back to him, lingering a moment too long. He felt like an exhibit. "It's a quiet street," she said. Finally, each word seemed carefully chosen. "Wade, good for those who like their privacy." She paused. "And for those who don't mind, the old stories." Her voice dropped on the last two words, becoming almost a whisper, a conspiratorial tone. That sent a shiver down Tom's spine. "Old stories?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light, casual. He didn't want to seem spooked, even though he was. Deeply. He wanted to know more, and yet he didn't. Carol's smile returned, falser than before. "Oh, you know how small towns are," she trilled, dismissively. But her eyes told a different story. They held a flicker of fear. Or was it warning, just gossip? "Don't you pay it any mind?" She backed away a step. "Enjoy the casserole." Then she turned and practically fled across the street without a backward glance. Tom watched her go, the cold dish in his hands. He had a sudden, strong urge to throw it in the trash, unopened. He didn't, but he didn't eat it either. The house had many quirks. Floorboards that groaned underfoot, like an old man complaining. Windows that rattled in their frames, even when there was no wind. Taps that dripped with a maddening rhythm, no matter how tightly he turned them. He told himself it was character, the charm of an old home, but a part of him knew this was more than just character. This was something else, something less benign. He was trying very hard not to listen to that part of himself. It was becoming increasingly difficult. One evening he was looking for a screwdriver. He knew he'd left it on the kitchen counter. He was sure of it. He'd used it to tighten a loose cabinet hinge just an hour before. Now it was gone. He searched the counter, the drawers, the toolbox, nothing. Annoyance pricked at him. He was tired, probably just misplaced it. He decided to look later. He went into the living room to read, to try and forget the creeping unease. The silence of the house pressed in. He tried to focus on his book. The words blurred. Later, heading up to bed, he saw it. The screwdriver, it was on the mantelpiece in the living room, placed neatly, almost formally, as if someone had set it there deliberately. He stared at it. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He hadn't been near the mantelpiece all evening. He lived alone. There was no one else in the house. No one who could have moved it. He picked it up. It felt cold, colder than it should. He told himself he was mistaken. He must have put it there and forgotten, but the explanation felt thin, hollow. He lay in bed that night. Sleep was a distant shore. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside his window sounded amplified, threatening. He thought of the screwdriver, such a small thing, so easily dismissed, yet it had unsettled him more than the watchful neighbors. More than Carol's cryptic warnings, because this was different. This was inside his house. This was personal. It was the first clear sign that the stories about Marrowood Court might not be just stories after all, and he was right in the middle of one. Tom tried to establish a routine, unpack, clean, make the house his own. He scrubbed floors with a vengeance. He painted walls a brighter, less mournful color. He wanted to dispel the gloom, but the house resisted, in subtle ways, and then in ways not so subtle. Tools would vanish from where he'd just placed them, only to reappear in odd locations. A hammer on his pillow, a paintbrush balanced precariously on a lampshade, small, unsettling pranks. Or perhaps territorial displays from an unseen occupant. He was starting to feel less like a homeowner and more like an intruder. One morning he walked into the kitchen. He stopped dead. Every cabinet door was open, every single one, hanging wide, like gaping mouths in silent scream. The night before he had meticulously closed them all. He was certain of it. He was developing a new, obsessive, compulsive level of certainty about such things. He lived alone. There was no one else. No wind could have done this, not with this precision, not with this intent. He slowly walked around the kitchen, his heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a cold dread wash over him. This was not a misplaced screwdriver. This was a statement. He closed each cabinet door, one by one. The clicks sounded unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He half expected them to fly open again as soon as his back was turned. He told himself there had to be an explanation. A tremor, an earthquake, too small to feel, but strong enough to unlatch old cabinets. But the glasses on the shelves hadn't rattled. Nothing else was disturbed, only the cabinets. It was a weak argument. Even in his own mind, the fear was a cold, metallic taste on his tongue. The house was playing with him, testing him. The incident left him shaken deeply. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder. He double-checked locked doors. He triple-checked closed cabinets. Sleep offered little escape. His dreams were filled with opening doors, with silent, watching rooms. The sense of being unwelcome was pervasive. It clung to him like the musty smell of the house. He was no longer just battling dust and decay. He was battling something else, something unseen, something that clearly didn't want him there, or perhaps wanted him there for reasons he couldn't begin to fathom. The revolt of the objects was just the beginning. He sensed that, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. The nights were the worst. The house seemed to come alive after dark. Not with life as he knew it, but with something else, something ancient and restless. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The old structure groaned and creaked, as all old houses do. He tried to tell himself that, but these sounds were different. They were rhythmic, almost deliberate. Footsteps pacing slowly in the hallway outside his bedroom door. Heavy, measured. He would hold his breath, listening, his skin crawling. Who walked the halls of his empty house? The whispers started subtly, faint murmurs, just at the edge of hearing. He'd think it was the wind or the rustling of leaves against the window pane, but they grew, becoming more distinct. Sibilant sounds like hushed conversations taking place in the next room. He could never make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Sometimes it sounded sorrowful, a mournful sigh carried on the air. Other times it felt mocking, a low, cruel chuckle that seemed to emanate from the very walls. He felt his sanity fraying little by little, each whisper a tiny cut. He would get out of bed, his heart pounding. He'd fling open his bedroom door, expecting to find someone, something. The hallway was always empty, dark, silent. The moonlight, when there was any, cast long, eerie shadows that twisted familiar shapes into monstrous forms. He'd call out, "Hello, is anyone there?" His voice would sound small, trembling, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The only reply was the echo of his own fear. The pacing would stop, the whispers would cease, as if whatever made them knew he was listening and knew he was afraid. Sleep became a battlefield. He fought against it, dreading the darkness, dreading the sounds. He started leaving lights on in the hallway, in the bathroom. It made little difference. The shadows still danced, the sound still came. He was tired, bone-tired. The lack of sleep gnawed at him, making him irritable, paranoid. He jumped at every creak, every rustle. The house was wearing him down. Its unseen residents were relentless. Their echoes in the dark were a constant reminder. He was not alone, and he was not welcome, not truly. It began with flickers, movements in the periphery of his vision. He'd catch a glimpse of something, a dark shape darting past a doorway, a pale blur in the reflection of a window. He told himself it was stress, lack of sleep. But the fleeting figures persisted, growing bolder. Then came the night he saw it more clearly, a figure standing by the window, tall and impossibly thin. It wasn't just a shadow, it had form, presence. Before he could scream, it was gone, vanished into the shadows. He stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. The brighter light did little to dispel the terror. He forced himself to look into the spare room again. It was empty, just a dusty, forgotten space. Had he imagined it? He wanted to believe that desperately, but the image was seared into his brain, the unnatural stillness of the figure, the profound sense of melancholy that had emanated from it. This was no trick of the light, he knew it, with a chilling certainty. The house wasn't just making noises anymore. It wasn't just moving objects. It was showing him its inhabitants, or perhaps its prisoners. He felt a new kind of fear, a deeper, more primal terror. The fleeting figures were becoming less fleeting, and he was afraid of what he might see next, if he dared to keep looking, or if he had any choice at all. Tom clung to rationality, like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. There had to be logical explanations for everything. The moving objects, perhaps slight earth tremors, common in older structures, or maybe he was just forgetful. The sounds, the wind, the house settling, old pipes, animals in the walls. He found nothing. No droppings, no nests, no entry points. He even bought a carbon monoxide detector. It remained silent. His explanations were wearing thin. The cold spots were harder to dismiss. They appeared without warning, drifting through rooms like unseen icebergs. One moment he'd be comfortable. The next, a patch of air would turn frigid, so cold his breath would mist. Goosebumps would erupt on his arms, even through his thickest sweater. These weren't just drafts. Drafts came from windows, from under doors. These cold spots materialized in the middle of rooms, hung heavy in the air, then vanished as quickly as they came, leaving behind an unnerving stillness and a faint, lingering scent, like damp earth or faded perfume. He called a heating specialist, an old weathered man named Jeb. Jeb, who had seen everything, or so Tom hoped. Jeb checked the furnace, the ductwork, the insulation. He found nothing wrong. "House is old, son," Jeb said, scratching his chin. "They get creaky, they get drafty." But Tom saw the look in Jeb's eyes as they stood in the living room where a cold spot had just manifested. Jeb shivered, pulled his collar tighter. "This ain't no ordinary draft, though," he muttered, almost to himself. He left quickly after that, refusing payment for finding nothing. Tom felt a growing despair. His attempts to rationalize were failing miserably. The house defied logic, it defied explanation. It operated under its own set of rules, unseen, unknowable. He was living in a place where the laws of physics seemed optional, where the dead, or whatever they were, had more claim than the living. The chill within the house was more than just physical. It was seeping into his mind, eroding his certainty, replacing it with a gnawing, persistent fear. He was losing the battle for his own sanity, and the house seemed to watch and wait patiently. The whispers had always been there, just beyond comprehension, a chorus of murmurs from the shadows. But one evening, as Tom sat hunched over a meagre dinner, one voice detached itself from the others. It was clear, cold, and undeniably close, as if someone was standing right behind him. "Thomas!" it hissed, a dry, rasping sound, like autumn leaves skittering across cold pavement. His name. It knew his name. He dropped his fork. It clattered loudly on the cheap plate. He spun around, chair scraping harshly against the floor. Nothing. The kitchen was empty, just him and the lingering echo of that single chilling word. His heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Who's there?" he managed to choke out. Silence answered him. A heavy, suffocating silence. He didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in the living room with every light blazing, a baseball bat clutched in his trembling hands. The voice hadn't threatened him, not explicitly, but the implication was clear. It knew him. It was here. Tom needed answers more than ever before. The voice that had spoken his name, it echoed, a constant, chilling reminder. This was personal now. He couldn't just live with it. He couldn't ignore it. His sanity felt like a fraying rope, stretched taut. The Ashworth County Public Library, it was his only lead. The library was a small, quiet building, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of Marrowood Court. Sunlight streamed through its tall windows, dust motes danced, it smelled of old paper and floor wax. Comforting, normal. For a moment Tom felt a sliver of hope. Maybe here he could find something logical, something mundane. An old property dispute, a forgotten family tragedy, anything but the nameless dread that consumed him. He approached the reference desk. A young librarian looked up, smiled. He asked for records on Marrowood Court. Her smile faltered. Just a little. Marrowood, she repeated, her voice softer now. There isn't much, I'm afraid. It's an old development. She led him to a small, neglected section, local history. The shelves were dusty. The books looked untouched for years. The faint trail of ink was proving hard to follow. Tom searched for any mention of his address, 13 Elder Lane, or any unusual events connected to Marrowood Court. The initial years were filled with mundane news, social gatherings, new families moving in, advertisements for modern conveniences. A veneer of normalcy, painted over something. He felt it. He found a brief article from 1928, fire on Elder Lane, no address given, just a small blaze, quickly extinguished, no casualties mentioned. Was it his house? Impossible to tell. He kept digging deeper into the archives. The dust seemed to whisper forgotten names, lost stories. Then a small notice from 1935, property auctioned, number 13 Elder Lane, sold for unpaid taxes. The previous owner, a Mr. Silas Blackwood. Blackwood, the developer's name. Coincidence? Unlikely. Why would the developer lose one of his own properties? There were no further details, no explanation, just a cold, legal fact. Recorded in faded ink, another piece of the puzzle. Small, obscure, but it felt significant, a thread to pull. He felt a chill despite the stuffy air of the archive room. Tom returned to the library the next day and the next. He was a man possessed, or perhaps hunted. He pieced together fragments, snippets of old news, obituaries, property records, faded photographs. A grim mosaic began to form, Marrowood Court. It wasn't just unlucky, it was cursed, or so it seemed. He found records of a diphtheria outbreak in the late 1920s. Centered almost exclusively within Marrowood Court, several children died, their small, sad notices buried deep in the paper. The official cause was the disease, but whispers at the time, whispers of something else, something unnatural, at play. He discovered more about Silas Blackwood. Before founding Blackwood Pines Inc., he was involved in other ventures. Some failed spectacularly. Others ended in legal disputes. There were rumors of him using unscrupulous methods, of swindling partners, of exploiting workers. He seemed to have a knack for making enemies and for acquiring land, often under questionable circumstances. The land where Marrowood Court now stood. It had been old farmland owned by a family called Morrow. The name echoed. Marrowood. Morrow. The library records gave him names, dates, cold facts, but they didn't tell the whole story, not the human story. He needed someone who remembered, someone who knew the whispers. Carol, his neighbor, had mentioned old stories. Perhaps she knew more, or knew someone who did. He thought of the old woman from the meticulously kept house, the one who had watched him with those dark, knowing eyes. She looked as old as Marrowood itself. He found out her name from Carol after a hesitant conversation, Mrs. Ilara Gable. Number 11 Elder Lane, a recluse. He approached her house with trepidation. The perfect lawn, the blood-red roses. They seemed almost menacing now. He rang the bell. The chime echoed faintly from within. For a long moment there was silence. He almost turned away. Then the door creaked open, just a crack. Mrs. Gable peered out. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes, sharp and intelligent, fixed on him. "What do you want?" Her voice was surprisingly strong. Clear. No hint of senility, only a weary impatience, as if she'd been expecting him sooner or later. "Mrs. Gable," Tom began, his voice unsteady. "My name is Tom Henderson. I live next door, number 13. She said nothing, her gaze unwavering. "I'm trying to understand the history of this place." Mrs. Gable's living room was like a museum. Dark, heavy furniture, thick velvet curtains. The air was still, smelling faintly of lavender and old grievances. She sat in a high-backed armchair, a queen on her throne. Tom sat opposite, on a stiff, uncomfortable sofa. She watched him for a long moment, her gaze piercing. "You remind me of him," she said finally, softly. "Who?" Tom asked, his throat dry. "The first one, the one who built your house, Silas Blackwood." Not a compliment, he understood that much. Her tone was laced with ice. "Silas Blackwood was a greedy man," Mrs. Gable began. Her voice was a low drone, the sound of ages past. "He came here in the early 20s, full of ambition and deceit." She told him about the Morrow family, simple farmers. They had owned the land for generations, Morrow's Dell. It was rumoured to be a special place, sacred to some. The Morrows were protectors of it, or so the stories went. They didn't want to sell, not to Blackwood, not to anyone, but Blackwood was relentless. He always got what he wanted. He used tricks, threats, false promises. He cheated them, Mrs. Gable stated. Tom left Mrs. Gable's house. His mind was reeling. A curse, a family wronged, a land soaked in sorrow. It sounded like something from a dark fairy tale, but the experiences in his own house, they were all too real. The knowledge settled heavily upon him, a suffocating weight. He now understood the source, the genesis of the malevolence, but understanding didn't bring peace. It brought a new kind of fear, a fear that he had stirred something by digging into its past, by speaking its secrets aloud. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the entities in his house now knew that he knew. That night, the activity in his house escalated violently. It was no longer just whispers or moving objects. It was a storm, a psychic onslaught. The temperature dropped dramatically. His breath plumed in every room. Doors slammed open and shut with explosive force, as if a furious wind tore through the house, though the air was still. Glassware shattered in the kitchen, exploding from shelves. Books flew from their cases, pages tearing, spines breaking. The house seemed to be tearing itself apart in a rage, or trying to tear him apart. The onslaught lasted for hours, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. When it finally subsided, the house was a wreck. Broken objects littered the floors, furniture was overturned. A chilling silence descended, heavier than before, expectant. Tom was emotionally and physically drained, shaking uncontrollably. He slowly got to his feet, surveying the devastation. This was not just a haunting anymore. This was a war, and he was losing. Badly. He had to get out, escape Marrowood Court, escape Elder Lane. He threw a few clothes into a bag, his hands trembling so hard he could barely zip it closed. He didn't care about his belongings. He just wanted to leave, to run, as far as possible. He fumbled for his car keys, found them, and clutched them tightly. He opened his front door, ready to flee into the night, but the street outside was not as he remembered. A thick, unnatural fog had rolled in, clinging to everything. It swirled like a living entity, obscuring the other houses. The streetlights cast eerie, diffused glows, barely penetrating the gloom. Marrowood Court looked like a landscape from a nightmare. He took a hesitant step onto the porch. The air was cold, heavy. It smelled of damp earth and decay, and something else, that cloying sweetness, stronger now. He heard a sound, a low chuckle coming from the fog. It seemed to surround him, mocking his attempt to flee. He started towards his car. Each step felt like wading through mud. His legs were heavy, his will was fading. The house behind him seemed to pulse, a dark, possessive energy. He felt its invisible tendrils reaching for him, holding him back. It didn't want him to leave, not yet, or perhaps not ever. He reached his car, fumbled with the lock. The fog pressed in, closer, thicker. He could barely see the end of his own driveway. A profound sense of despair washed over him. Escape seemed impossible. The neighborhood itself was a prison. The curse wasn't just in the house. It was in the land, in the air. And now, perhaps it was in him. He had learned its secrets. He had become part of its story. The walls of Marrowood Court were closing in, and he was trapped, imprisoned by a past that refused to stay buried. The fog was a living thing, cold, wet. It wrapped around Tom like a damp burial shroud. He stood by his car, keys digging into his palm. The familiar shape of his vehicle was a ghostly outline, a false promise of escape. He tried the door handle. It felt icy, reluctant. The fog swirled thicker, as if sensing his intent, as if trying to pull him back towards the house, number 13. Its dark windows watched him, even through the oppressive mist. He felt their gaze, cold, possessive, knowing. Marrowood Court was not ready to let him go. He could hear sounds from within the fog, not the angry shouts from before. These were different, softer, more insidious whispers, the whispers of the lost, the Morrow family perhaps, their sorrowful sighs, their endless laments. He heard children crying faintly, just at the edge of hearing. The sound twisted his insides. He thought of the diphtheria outbreak, the small graves, the pain that had soaked into this land. The fog seemed to carry their voices, their grief, making him a part of their eternal suffering. It was a chorus of despair, and it was all around him. He took a step, then another, away from the car, away from the house, trying to find the street, the main road, safety, but the fog disoriented him. Every direction looked the same, a grey, swirling void. The streetlights were useless, smothered beacons in an ocean of mist. He felt a primal panic rising, claustrophobia in the open air. He was lost, utterly lost, just a few feet from his own driveway. The neighborhood had transformed into a labyrinth, a trap designed specifically for him. He was a rat in its maze, the cold seeped into his bones, a deeper chill than any he had felt before. It wasn't just the fog, it was the essence of Marrowood, the curse itself reaching out, touching him, claiming him. He stumbled, nearly fell, his breath hitched in his chest. He was alone, surrounded by unseen things, things that had suffered, things that wanted him to suffer too. The fog was not just a weather phenomenon, it was a manifestation, a tool of the haunting, a barrier between him and the outside world, a suffocating shroud. There was no exit from Elder Lane, not tonight. Section 213's embrace, the house that breathes. He turned back towards the house, number 13. It loomed out of the fog, a dark, hulking shape, more menacing than ever. It seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, or maybe it was just his terrified imagination. He had tried to flee it and failed. Now it felt like his only option, his only refuge, or his final prison. The thought sent a shiver of pure dread down his spine. But the fog was relentless, pushing him, guiding him back towards that cursed structure, back towards the source of his terror. As he approached, the front door creaked open, slowly, invitingly, or perhaps mockingly. No wind stirred the heavy air. The house was doing this. It wanted him back inside. He hesitated on the porch steps. The wood felt cold beneath his feet. Even through his shoes, he could feel a faint vibration coming from within the house, like a slow, steady heartbeat, or the deep, rhythmic breathing of some colossal, slumbering beast. The house was alive. He knew it now, with a certainty that defied all logic. It was waiting for him patiently. He had no choice. The fog was too thick, the whispers too close. He stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him, with a soft, final click. The sound of a trap snapping closed. The air inside was heavy, stale, filled with the scent of dust, decay, and that sickly sweet odor. The devastation from the earlier psychic storm was still evident. Broken shards of glass crunched underfoot, overturned furniture lay like fallen soldiers. But amidst the chaos there was a strange stillness, an expectant silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The presence was stronger here, inside, palpable. It wrapped around him, an invisible embrace, cold, unyielding. He felt it probing his mind, sifting through his thoughts, his fears. It knew him intimately. It had studied him, learned his weaknesses. This was its domain, its sanctuary, and he was its captive. The house didn't need chains to hold him. It held him with its atmosphere, with its history, with the very air he breathed. He was caught in 13's embrace, and it was tightening its grip, slowly, surely. The fog outside pressed against the windows, grey, opaque, but inside the house a different kind of fog seemed to gather. In the darkest corners, in the deep shadows, it swirled, it coalesced, taking on a vague, humanoid form. Tom backed away, heart hammering, his eyes wide with terror. This was more than just a fleeting figure, more than a shadow. This was something forming, taking shape before his very eyes. He wanted to scream, but his throat was constricted. Paralyzed by fear, he could only watch, powerless. The shape solidified, grew clearer. It was tall, gaunt, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothing, like the figure he had seen in the spare room. But now, he could almost make out features, sunken eyes. That burned with a cold, sorrowful fire, a lipless mouth, twisted in a silent snarl, or a grimace of eternal pain. Was this Silas Blackwood? the greedy developer, or was it Old Man Morrow, the betrayed farmer, or perhaps something else entirely, something born of their combined misery, a composite entity of rage and sorrow? Then, for a horrifying instant, the face shifted, became a blur of other faces, a rapid succession of tortured expressions, men, women, children, their eyes wide with fear, their mouths open in silent screams. He saw the faces of Marrowood's countless victims, trapped, suffering, their agony echoed in the oppressive silence of the room. This wasn't just one ghost, it was a legion, a collective consciousness of pain, bound to this house, to this land, and they were all looking at him, accusing him, demanding something from him. The vision lasted only a moment, then the primary figure solidified again, its burning eyes fixed on Tom. It raised a shadowy hand, not to attack, but to point, pointing towards the center of the living room, towards a specific spot on the floorboards, as if indicating something important, something he was meant to see or understand. He didn't want to look, he didn't want to know, but he felt an irresistible compulsion to follow that pointing finger, to gaze upon whatever horror it revealed. This was a glimpse beyond the veil, and it was utterly terrifying. Tom's gaze followed the pointing finger to a dark stain on the old wooden floor, a stain he hadn't noticed before, or perhaps one that hadn't been there before. It was roughly circular, deeply ingrained, like old blood, or something far worse. As he stared, the stain seemed to shimmer, to writhe. He felt a wave of nausea, a profound sense of defilement. This spot, this was the heart of it, the nexus of the curse, the epicenter of the house's pain. He could feel the raw, concentrated malevolence emanating from it, like heat from a furnace. "What do you want?" Tom finally choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper. He wasn't sure who he was talking to, the gaunt figure, the legion of faces, the house itself. It didn't matter. He was desperate. He would talk to anything, if it meant an end to this torment. "What do you want from me?" he repeated, louder this time, a plea, a challenge, a cry of utter despair. He had nothing left to lose, except his sanity, and that was already slipping away, rapidly, like sand through his fingers. He needed this to stop. The figure remained silent, its burning eyes unwavering, the accusing finger still pointing. There would be no negotiation, no easy answers. The entity didn't communicate in words, it communicated in feelings, in visions, in pure, unadulterated terror. It wanted him to understand, to feel its pain, to share its burden. It wanted retribution, or perhaps simply a witness. Another soul to add to its collection. He felt a cold dread creep through him. There was no bargaining with this kind of despair. It was absolute, consuming. He tried again. "I didn't do anything," he pleaded. "I didn't know about Blackwood, about the Morrows. I just bought the house." His words sounded hollow, pathetic, even to his own ears. The curse didn't care about his intentions. It didn't care about his ignorance. It had been waiting for someone like him, someone susceptible, someone who would dig, someone who would listen. And now it had him. He had stumbled into its web, and the spider was not interested in letting him go. His plea to the shadows was met with an icy, implacable silence, a silent, terrifying refusal. As Tom stared at the dark stain, a strange sensation began to creep over him, a coldness, starting in his feet, creeping up his legs. It wasn't the cold of the room or the fog. This was different, an internal chill, as if his very blood was turning to ice. He looked down at his hands. They seemed paler, thinner, almost translucent in the dim, eerie light. He felt a profound weariness, a bone-deep exhaustion, as if he hadn't slept in years or centuries. What was happening to him? The gaunt figure before him seemed to nod, slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if in acknowledgement or approval. Tom felt a connection to it, a horrifying, unwelcome empathy. He could almost feel its ancient sorrow, its unending rage, its desperate longing for something. Peace? Revenge? Release? He felt these things stirring within himself now, echoes of the entity's torment, becoming his own. The mark of Marrowood was not just on the land or in the house, it was being imprinted upon his very soul. An unseen, unholy inheritance. He tried to pull away from the stain, to stand up, but his legs felt heavy. Rooted to the spot, he was a part of this now, part of the house, part of its curse. He remembered Mrs. Gable's words, "The land remembers," and now, it seemed, the land was making him remember too, making him a vessel for its pain. He felt a subtle shift in his perception. The shadows in the room seemed less threatening, more familiar. The whispers in the air, less like an attack, more like company. This realization terrified him more than anything else. He was changing, and the house was claiming him, not just his body, but his essence. He was becoming one of them. Another lost soul bound to this place. The thought was a cold spear of ice through his heart. He was not just a victim of the haunting, he was becoming a part of it. The curse wasn't just an external force anymore. It was seeping into him, merging with him. He could feel its tendrils wrapping around his consciousness, tightening their grip. He was inheriting the darkness of Marrowood Court, whether he wanted to or not. There was no escape from this legacy. The sun never seemed to fully rise over Marrowood Court anymore. Tom couldn't see it. The fog remained, a permanent fixture, swirling, whispering, isolating the neighborhood from the rest of the world. He no longer tried to leave. He knew it was pointless. Number 13. Elder Lane was his home now, his prison, his tomb. He didn't fight the presence anymore. He had become accustomed to it, or perhaps assimilated by it. The line between himself and the haunting had blurred, then vanished altogether. He sometimes saw Carol, his neighbor. She would leave casseroles on his porch, her smile still too wide, her eyes still full of a darting, knowing fear. She never lingered. She never tried to speak to him, as if she knew, as if she recognized the change in him. He would watch her retreat from his darkened window, a silent, unmoving figure, just like Mrs. Gable, who also watched. From her own window, 2 sentinels, guarding the secrets of Elder Lane, or perhaps guarding its newest captive. He was part of their silent, sorrowful vigil now. The house was quiet now, most of the time. The violent outbursts had ceased. The entity, or entities, seemed placated. Or perhaps they had simply found what they were looking for. A new anchor, a new custodian. Tom would wander the rooms, touching the old walls, feeling the faint thrum of their ancient sorrow. He understood them now. He felt their pain as his own. He was a part of their endless story. The whispers were still there, but now, sometimes, he thought he could almost understand them. They were no longer alien. They were familiar. One day, a new family might come to Marrowood Court, drawn by a cheap house, a promise of a fresh start. They wouldn't know about Silas Blackwood, or the Morrows, or the curse that saturated the very soil. They wouldn't see the thin, pale man who watched them from the window of number 13, not at first. But Marrowood Court would be waiting, the house would be waiting. And Tom Henderson, its newest, most reluctant custodian, would be waiting too, forever bound, forever watching. The haunting of Marrowood Court would continue, its dread open-ended, its hunger eternal.